and then I will hand over and he will take us through the rest of the session today. So Paul Gilbert, OBE, is a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Derby and honorary visiting professor at the University of Queensland. Until his retirement from the NHS in 2016, he was consultant clinical psychologist for over 40 years. He has researched evolutionary approaches to psychopathology with a special focus on mood, shame, and self-criticism in various mental health difficulties, for which compassion-focused therapy was developed. He was made a Fellow of the British Psychological Society in 1993, President of the BABCP 2002 to 2004, and was a member of the first British government's NICE guidelines for depression. He has written, edited 23 books and over 300 papers and book chapters. In 2006, he established the Compassionate Mind Foundation as an international charity with the mission statement to promote well-being through the scientific understanding and application of compassion. I'm going to post the link for those of you that have not seen Paul's website shortly. There are now a number of sister foundations in other countries. He was awarded an OBE by the Queen in March 2011 for services to mental health. He established and is the director of Centre for Compassion Research and Training at Derby University in the UK. And his latest book is a major edited book with Professor G. Seymour's 2022, Compassion, Clinical Practice and Applications. So thank you to Paul, and I will now mute myself and hand over to Paul. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Amber, and thank you, Joe, and the Disorder for Everyone movement, because I think it's a wonderful movement, really, of helping us understand that many of us are vulnerable to very distressing states of mind, but it doesn't mean to say we are kind of disordered. The mind has a way of doing things and causing suffering because that's what minds do. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides with you. And that's the hope. There we go. Okay, so that's not the one I want, sorry. Share my slides with you. And share screen, okay. Of course, now they've disappeared from the screen, haven't they? So what I'm going to be doing today is to look at something which is not actually in your handouts. And this is to do with the, there we go, that's better. And this is to do with how we understand compassion and the origins of compassion, because it's obviously very important that we do have a way of thinking about the origins of compassion, and that should be what we need. And I think that is what we need. Is that right, Amber? We got it right now.
Perfect.
Yeah, sorry, it totally disappeared. You know, these things happen. Okay, so a couple of things just to set you up. First, this is the new book, and basically everything I'm going to be talking about you can read in here for those of you who are interested in the psychotherapy aspect. So today we are going to explore the nature of compassion. Then we're going to explore the 4 functions of mind and how they relate to compassion. The cultivation of compassion is going to be in the last part. So after the coffee break, we're going to be taking you through some practices, some exercises that you can try for yourself. Now, a few other things that we always highlight in our workshops, which is that these slides are for your own information, and we probably won't cover all of them because sometimes it's a bit difficult to judge times. The personal practices really are for you, and they're entirely voluntary, and do look after yourself, because sometimes when you're doing practices which invite you to think about compassion, it can stir up some sadness or other problems. So just look after yourself, and the material is confidential. Not so much on this because we're not going to be talking about clients particularly, but some of the material is certainly copyright. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about, and Chodin's with us this afternoon, which is lovely, and I've worked with Chodin for many years. He's a Buddhist monk, being a Buddhist monk, and we're going to be doing a retreat on this stuff in May, if anybody's interested. But there's been a lot of confusion about the nature of compassion and the nature of love and so on. Now, I'm very much working with the way in which our minds are being designed, and we know that our minds have been designed such that biological functions of mind can give rise to consciousness. At least that's the materialistic view, that actually consciousness arises out of the biology of the mind. And there's a lot of work going on now in quantum mechanics and how neurons work and everything. But a later stage, which is primarily probably only for humans, it might be in other species, we don't know, is not only are we conscious, but we're conscious of being conscious. And this is called self-aware consciousness. And self-aware consciousness is what allows you then to become mindful, to be able to reflect on what you're doing, to think about your own mind, to have metacognition and so forth. But it's all linked to this basic DNA-created brain. On the other hand, the traditional contemplative traditions have a very different view, a completely different view, which is that actually consciousness is not a product of the brain. The brain is a product of consciousness, that consciousness is the ground of all being, that consciousness itself is empty, but it is that which gives rise to form and gives rise to experiences of non-duality. So this is a complete reversal about cause and effect, total reversal. And there's quite a lot of physicists now who are taking this view very, very seriously, that consciousness creates physical forms, the nature of reality, the laws of the universe. So from the subatomic particles all the way up to complex bodies and brains, these are all to do with the patterns that this field of consciousness, which is a field of energy, creates. So basically the atoms in your body were once maybe atoms in the sea or atoms in a dinosaur. Nothing has any individual existence by itself. Everything is a creation of a pattern. They're all patterns, and the patterns emerge like a kaleidoscope. They come and they go like waves on the sea. A wave doesn't have any individual existence. It comes into existence, goes out of existence. So the key thing then in the Buddhist and the contemplative tradition is this idea of that the essence of the ground of all being is empty of individual form, but it creates form. And by stilling the mind, by allowing your mind to still, to sort of control all this biological chatter of needs and thoughts and worries and that's going on here, by just allowing yourself to sit here, sit in the experience of consciousness, you begin to have very different insights into the nature of your mind, to the ancient nature of your being, and also beginning to see the illusions of a biological mind. Now, this is very important because when we look at the nature of experiences that people have, when they have these transcendent experiences, this non-duality experience, it's very, very important that we recognize that actually these experiences are associated with the, not the loss of self really, but more of an expansion of self. It's not the loss of the ego, it's it's an expansion into the being of all things. So this is a quote from William James. I felt myself one with the grass, the trees, birds, insects, everything in nature. I exulted in the mere fact of existence, of being part of it all. I knew so well the satisfaction of losing self and the perception of supreme power and love, right? Now, this is important because these self-transcendent experiences of non-duality, they have an experience of love, but not the kind of love that we experience in our biological minds. And it's very important people don't confuse these two. So here's a quote from Alan Watts. I lost boundary to my physical body. I had my skin, of course, but I felt I was standing in the center of the cosmos. And this is from Taylor, who was a neurologist who had a stroke. I could no longer clearly discern the physical boundaries of where I began and where I ended. I sensed the composition of my being as that of a fluid rather than a solid. I no longer perceived myself as a whole object separate from everything. So these transcendent experiences are really the experiences that come out of this experiencing of the nature of consciousness itself. Now, these are important because it means that we can have thoughts about, what is our nature? Well, you could argue our nature is gene built. We're gene built beings to do certain things. We come to existence, we mess around for a bit and then we die. Or our true nature is not our biology, what you see yourself now, the names you call yourself, the the sense of identity you have. That's not our true nature. Our true nature is we are part of the ground of all being. We are part of consciousness itself. What is love? Gene built and bounded. That's one view about love. And we can actually understand the biology of love. We can stimulate your brain so you'll have feelings of love. We can give you chemicals that will ruin your dopamine or endorphins, and then you won't have much of the feelings of love. So we know that from a biological point of view, love is very much linked to what's going on in your brain. But when you're in this non-duality experience, you have experiences of non-duality and you transcend the biological, this feeling of being one with everything, that is what love is. There is no separation between you and anything else. So not to love wouldn't make any sense, because there's nothing not to love, because you're part of everything, right? Now, I've been part of a documentary that's talked to people who've had these experiences, and they say love is the only word you can use, but it's not really love. It's not really that. It's an extraordinary sense of blissful transcendence, but we don't have another word in English. That's the only word we can use. And this is going to be important when we think about compassion in a minute. So what is compassion? Well, in both traditions, compassion is the awareness of suffering and a commitment to try to prevent it. So both from a biological point of view, but also a self-transcendent point of view, when we begin to understand the nature of suffering, there's a real desperate wish to stop it. We don't want people to suffer. And again, the textures of this are slightly different from the enlightened as opposed to the biological. So the compassionate wish then, and again, whether you're a biologically based compassion or whether you're a consciousness-based compassion, is the same, that may all sentient beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering, and may I be part of that crusade, if you like. So this is important because when we look at the biological mind, it's very clear that we have compassion motives, but these compassion motives are contained. What this means is I'm compassionate to you because I like you and you like me. I love you and you love me, and it's all very nice. But then generating for compassion for people you don't like or don't know, that's a much, much more difficult proposition, completely different proposition. So compassion from a biological position is bounded. In other words, you don't feel it for everybody. And for people you dislike, or people who you regard as your enemies, or people you regard as harmful to others, or whatever it is, you definitely do not feel compassion for them. And one of the problems that you've got in the Middle East is a complete failure of the compassion motivational systems, because they're well and truly turned off. And that's what happens in biological minds. Biological minds, they can indeed be compassionate, but they can also not be compassionate. Whereas over here, it doesn't have any meaning to be compassionate, not compassionate. It wouldn't have any meaning because you are part of everything, right? That's a very different, it's not dependent on biology. It's dependent upon this capacity for insight into the nature of consciousness and the ground of all being. And it's a problem as well because this brain actually can get up to all kinds of mischief. So when we look at it, the biological brain, what we find is that not only is it not always very passionate, but it has a terrible dark side. This brain is up to all kinds of horrible things. The Holocaust, the tortures, the way women have been treated, and so on and so on is just horrific. Humans are the nastiest, most vicious species that have ever existed. And do not try and think that our basic nature, when you're looking at biological mind, is compassion, because it isn't. Compassion is true for people you like and for your family and your kids and all that. That's natural compassion, but the Buddha would call that sentimentality. Actually, humans are potentially a nasty species. Now, this is very important because when we come to compassion from a biological side, that means that we need to constantly be aware about our potential for harmfulness. And compassion is partly an awareness that we choose compassion because we want to prevent harmfulness. We want to prevent suffering. And if we're going to prevent suffering, then since we are the cause of a lot of suffering, then we need to work on how we're going to do that. Now, on the green side, however, none of this makes any sense. There is no motivation to be harmful in the ground of all being because everything is connected. There is only that sense of blissful interconnectedness. Okay, so you don't have to, you don't worry about that. And what you find is that when people have these deeper insights, they are aware that all of us have a consciousness that are trapped in a body and a brain, and all of us are our consciousness is textured by the stuff that's going on in the brain, right? And we're all trapped by that. We don't have insight that that is the nature of the illusion of the self. It's not just the illusion of a personal self, it's the illusions of a mind that's that the content of which is created by your biology. So if you take LSD or something, you'll have a totally different experience because your chemistry will be different. So the Buddha's position is that because you have these biological brains that are constantly giving you anger or rage or a sense of self or whatever, these are all really illusions. These are parts of the self that come and go. They come into existence, you know, for a while. They exist for 70 years or whatever it was, and then they will fade away. And what's left on the shore is the essence of consciousness itself. And so the idea then is that consciousness is really the key. And in the domains of consciousness, the ground of all being, there is no separation between you or anything else. Okay, so these are important considerations because otherwise we run into all kinds of trouble about, you know, compassion is about we have to learn to love people and all that. That's great, but you can't really do that. I mean, the key to understand that if you want that kind of love, then you have to train your mind and move towards enlightenment and transpersonal and non-duality experiences. When we're using our biological minds, which most of us are trying to do, then you have to be able to work with the fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion. You have to be aware that we train compassion precisely because we know we are not just going to be compassionate to everyone and everything in all contexts. We know that there will be some individuals who we will not be compassionate to. We know we all have a part of ourselves that could be very angry or very hurtful or dislike ourselves or whatever. And we choose compassion because we know that we're going to have to work with some of the darker sides of our minds. On the green side, there is no darker side of your mind because consciousness is consciousness. Okay, so first then, I'm a materialist. In terms of my therapy, obviously, I don't teach people transcendent experiences or how to do that. We're going to be looking at that in our retreats, and we're going to be seeing how the biological and these things link. But for the time being, we're going to be looking at how we use it as a therapy, looking at it with people with biological minds. So just spend a few moments exploring then what we mean by compassion. Okay, so I'm going to ask you just to spend a few minutes, not too long, well, not minutes, actually seconds. I'm sorry, I have to be seconds because we're a bit short of time. A few seconds. So what does compassion mean to you? When you think of the word compassion, you can just say this in your own mind. You don't have to speak it out. Just make a note of what you think compassion is. So you might have written down many things, such as compassion is about being kind or helpful or empathic or sensitive or understanding. That's all common, what people think about compassion. Sometimes people think, yeah, compassion is being nice and, you know, nice to people, kind to people and all that stuff, but it's not really tough enough when things are difficult. And what we would say is that actually these are ways of being compassionate. And it's quite important to distinguish between a way of being compassionate, but they're not necessarily compassion itself. The core of compassion, as we were going to show you in a moment, or argue anyway, is these three. These three are crucial to what compassion is: courage, wisdom, and commitment. And to be helpful when we're struggling, okay? So kindness and all that stuff, that's all fine. It's good. That's good for you. But compassion is this dedication to address suffering with courage, wisdom, and commitment. Okay. So, okay. So we've just said that really. Compassion, however, is to address suffering and its causes. These are all ways of being compassionate. Okay. If you didn't have them, right, you'd struggle. So if you weren't able to be assertive, you let people just walk all over you, then that wouldn't be very good. If you weren't particularly forgiving, if you bore grudges and went chose to be vengeful and hurt people as much as you could, that's probably not very compassionate. So these things are important to helping us to behave compassionately. So let's have a think about what and people give many reasons for why they think compassion is not a good thing. You know, people don't deserve it, it's too emotional or whatever. Okay, so what I'm going to invite you to do now is, this is how we introduce it to our clients. Spend a few moments thinking about what it is you like. Bring a friend to mind. Yeah, it's on the wrong one there. Bring a friend, just bring a friend to mind. And spend a few moments thinking about what it is you like about them. Maybe they make you laugh, or they're always nice to you, or they're kind to you, or they're friendly, or you're on the same wavelength. So what we're doing now is we're tuning your mind into a memory to get in contact with that sense of connectedness. Okay. Now I'd like you to imagine that your friend has a letter to say they've got to go to hospital, but actually they're hospital phobic. They're frightened of hospitals. They stay away from hospitals, and they're really, really upset, and they're really frightened. So just for a moment, use your empathy and imagine being your friend. Now, part of what compassion is, therefore, is an empathic bridge into the mind of the other. Okay. I have to have some sense of what's happening for you. And one way, there's many ways of doing that. One way of doing that is to imagine being you, if that were me. Okay. If I was in that situation. And sometimes we can just do it automatically, and sometimes we can deliberately practice. If you're a therapist, sometimes when I was seeing clients, I would sit in their chair for a couple of minutes before they arrived, and I would just imagine I was them. And I'd look at the other chair and I'd imagine that was me, and the other chair is the therapist. And I try to think what I would like, what I would want, become them, okay, to enter into their state of mind. So empathy then is learning to just imagining being them. Okay, so let's assume that you can do that. So you get a sense of what it must be like to have to go for an operation, and you're absolutely terrified, not just of the operation, but going to hospital. So reflect on the feelings you would have for your friend. What would you like your friend to know about what you're thinking and feeling about them? If you would talk to your friend about it, what would you want them to know that you were thinking? You know, how are you? How would you switch to the kinds of things and start to think about how you could help your friend? Okay. So these are in the wrong order. I do apologize. So the thing is that what would happen is when your friend phoned you up and said, look, you know, I can't go to hospital, I'm so far, anything, the chances are you would respond to them with a kind of an understanding, and you know, you would understand them. You wouldn't say to them, oh, don't be so stupid, you need an operation, get down to that hospital. If you were empathically connected, you'd say, I understand that you were really upset because going to hospital can be very frightening. So we call this sensitivity to distress. You'd have a sensitivity to them. You'd empathically engage with them and be aware of what's happening for them. Now, of course, that doesn't mean to say that you've got a fear of hospitals. You might not have a fear of hospitals, but you're able to empathically be sensitive to the distress in your friend, to feel for them. All right. But that would only be part of it, wouldn't it? Because the next thing, having sensitivity to suffering, would be, so what can you do? All right. So you don't just say to your friend, oh, I'm sorry to hear you going there. I can understand how you're feeling. The chances you would then say, so can I help you? What would help you? You know, do you want me to kind of phone you up on a regular basis? Would you like me to come and see you? Supposing I took you to the hospital, I came with you, held your hand before you went in. How would that be? You'd be working out what would be helpful. Now, this is very important in compassion, because compassion, you have to have the two processes, the ability to be sensitive, to kind of have some sort of understanding about what the suffering is about and why, but also have some kind of working out what's going to be helpful. Otherwise, it's all just good intention, isn't it, really? It doesn't go. And what we know is that for people who are only sensitive, but they don't know what to do, or they're not motivated to do anything, those individuals tend to get stressed. So the doing part of compassion is very important. So we listen and try to understand, we are sensitive to suffering, and then we work out ways to be helpful. Okay, so this is just saying the same thing here, really. So this is saying the same thing. So when we are being compassionate, we are sensitive to distress, not turning away, not defending against it, not denying it, not dissociating from it. And that's true for our own distress, whether it's trauma, memory, whatever it is. We turn towards it, we're going to move towards it, we're going to try to understand what this is about. And then we work out, okay, so what is it I need? Or what does that person need? What would be helpful to that person? And so that gives rise to compassion as a sensitivity to suffer and others, but it also has to be associated with thinking through and efforts to try to alleviate and prevent. Because if you only have sensitivity, people get burnt out by that, and they don't want to engage because they feel helpless or hopeless. They don't know what to do. So when people don't know what to do, or they feel overwhelmed or helpless, actually it turns off their sensitivity. They become less sensitive. So this is really quite important. That and understanding that sometimes, even if we can only do very small things, those small things are really, really important. So this is more the kind of a little bit more of a scientific approach, right? This is the definition we've used for many years. And we call it an algorithm. Now, what an algorithm actually means is that it's an if A do B. And so it's like everything works on if A do B. For example, if you see a tiger, then body gets anxious and heart rate goes up and you run away. If you see something that's wonderful to eat, then you get saliva, and then you approach the food and you start putting it in your mouth. If you see a sexual opportunity, you don't do that unless you're Hannibal Lecter or something. You do completely different. So if A, then B. If the temperature in the room now goes very, very low, you will start to shiver. If the temperature goes very high, then you'll start to sweat. If A do B, if A do B. And your body is really organized around algorithms of if A do B. Now, for the compassion, it's the stimulus detection of suffering, right? Can you detect it? Are you engaged with it? Do you go into it? So the first part of the process is to be able to detect, to approach, understand, and how to engage with suffering is very, very important, extremely important. But then remember, you must have that second part to work out how to alleviate, prevent suffering, even small things, right? So you can't go and have the operation for your friend. You can't do that. You have to find how to give her the courage to go. You can be a support for it, right? So, when we talk about alleviating, preventing, we're talking about facilitating actions. Okay, so as I say, you can't do the operation, and you can't have the operation for your friend, but you can help your friend develop what they need. Now, that means that each of these require courage and wisdom, because courage without wisdom is reckless, right? So just bundling your friend into the car, say, "Don't worry, it's okay. I'll take you to the hospital. We'll go right now." Blah, 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 blah. See, your friend get overwhelmed by that. If you see somebody fall into a fast flowing river, you think, "I must save them." So you jump in, and then you think, "Oh, shit, I actually can't swim." Reckless, right? Sometimes in Buddhism, it's called idiot compassion. So wonderful intention. I mean, you're really there. You do everything you can, but you haven't got a clue what you're doing, so tend to make it worse. On the other hand, wisdom without courage is ineffective. That people know what to do. They know what would be helpful, but they're frightened to do it. And this is very common when people don't speak up. People don't speak up for the moral position because they're worried about other people criticizing them or rejecting them. The fear of the consequences of compassionate behavior because people will attack you for it, whatever, that means you have the wisdom, you know how to be compassionate, you know what should be happening, but you get attacked. And we've seen that terribly, terribly in the Middle East. We've seen where people have spoken up for what actually is necessary for humanitarian aid and humanitarian way, but they've also been attacked by the other side and so on. So you need the wisdom to be able to be prepared to take the risks that can be associated with compassion. So that's very, very important. Compassion, courage, and wisdom, very, very important. And then commitment. You need commitment, because without commitment, you're not going to do anything really. You know, I have the courage. I could do it, and I know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I can't be bothered. I don't really want to do it. So you lack the commitment. Now that's important, because if you think about like health, all right, health. Most of us know, and don't look at my body too much, most of us know what we should do to lose weight and get fit. We have the wisdom. We're not frightened of it. We're completely capable of going to the gym. We're not frightened of the gym. We're not frightened of giving up the pizzas, but we don't do it. There's commitment. We don't have the commitment to do what we need to do in order for us to get it to our maximum fitness and health, right? So all those three, courage, wisdom, and commitment, all those three are really quite important when you're working with compassion, because if you lose any one of them, compassion can struggle. Now, this is very important. This is why you must have the two factors of compassion. There's a lot of stuff out on compassion out on the internet. You read, it's, compassion, just being nice, it's a bit of kindness, or, you just go love each other. It's all about love. Put your hands there and just love, right? It's not that. Compassion is this real dedication to understand suffering, to be prepared to suffer, to have the courage to engage with what's stirred up in you, but also the wisdom and courage to know, or to try to work out what to do and be committed to do it, right? So it's quite a deal, compassion, actually, when you go into it. And that's clearly what happens when we're doing the CFT. Now, in fact, in compassion focused therapy, we can go even better than that, in a way that we can begin to look at the specifics of engagement. How do we engage? Well, firstly, we have a motivation to care for the well-being of ourselves or others. We're sensitive. We pay attention, our attention. We have a sympathetic reaction. Now, there's also stuff on the internet that you'll see where people say, oh, sympathy is a bad thing. It's just, it's not. I'm so sorry, but it's nonsense. If you want to read about sympathy, Nancy Eisenberg has done some brilliant research. Sympathy is your personal reaction, right? Okay, so somebody tells you about, I don't know, child abuse or everything, and you just go very angry about it. The person who's telling you might not be angry. They may be very sad. Okay, they may be very anxious, but your personal reaction is you're moved by that, what you're hearing. Okay, but it might not be empathic, in the sense it might not be what the other person, but that's your personal reactions. And it's very important that we have personal reactions, and we can tolerate those reactions as well. That's very important. We can tolerate them. So if people say, oh, I can't, I just can't take this, I don't want to know, because it gets me so angry, I don't want to, no. So if we can't tolerate our reactions, if we get overwhelmed by our reactions, we don't have to stress tolerance, we turn off. Okay, and this is very true for people who are working with their own stuff, like with trauma. If they start to become sensitive and engage with some of the trauma memories, and then they feel the pain of those memories, then there's no, I can't, it's just too much, I can't cope with it, so they turn it off. But assuming that we can hold with that, we can care, we can pay attention, we can be sensitive, we pay attention, we start processing the pain, and we can deal with our reactions to doing that, and we can tolerate them. Now we can be empathic, we can understand the basis of that pain, we can understand what it's about, how does it work, right? And we're non-judgmental. We don't push it away. So these are the 6 competencies that are related to how we develop compassionate sensitivity. Now, when you're doing therapy, you sometimes have to work on all of them, okay? Because you get a lot of avoidance. People don't actually want to be attentive. I don't, if you're working with trauma, clients will say, I don't want, no, I just want you to take it away. I don't want to have to think about my trauma again, I don't want to have to feel, I don't want to have to remember how frightened I was, I can't tolerate it. So you might have to do work with distress tolerance or attention. And then you might have a client says, I shouldn't get overwhelmed. It's stupid. What's the matter with me? I just can't cope, blah, 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 blah. All of the stuff that you as a society, the disorder for everybody is so important that people start shaming themselves and criticizing themselves. And if you do that, you're not going to be empathic. You're not going to be able to be empathic to your distress because you're just going to kind of push it away or whatever. But when you can tolerate it, and let me understand why I'm feeling so distressed. Let me understand what this stress is about. Okay. And again, if you're working with other people, let me understand what their distress is about. Let me try and empathically try and engage with them, listen to them, try and be in their mind, really get them to explain to me. Okay. All right. But that's the first psychology. Then the second one, of course, is action, taking action. All right. Very, very important because you understand now, but what are you going to do? So imagine you go to hospital, you've got a broken arm, right? Go to hospital and you have a wonderful doctor who's very sensitive to you, and they're very sensitive. I said, oh my goodness, I can see you've broken your arm, and look, the bone's sticking through. Oh my goodness me. Oh God, just makes me, even when I see that, I feel your horror, I'm so distressed, and I can understand why you're screaming. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. It's okay. And I'm not going to judge you for it. You just scream away. It's all right, I'm a very sensitive, empathic doctor. You know what I mean? I can feel your pain. I understand your pain. I understand why you're screaming. I get it. I really do get it. At some point, you're going to say, well, that's okay. But would you mind seeing if there's anything you could do about it? So a good doctor in an A&E will be very sensitive to the pain, but only fleetingly. All right. They'll hold your hand because I've just been through a hospital where I had to have major surgery. I was very ill. They hold your hand, pretty, but the most important thing is they want to know what's the problem and they want to try and work it out. See, so you then have to pay attention to, okay, so what's happening here? What's this about? What do we need? And you might have imagery in your mind to start thinking about, okay, so if we do that, or if we do that, maybe we could do that. I did that last week and that seemed to work, but I did this 2 weeks ago and that didn't seem to work. So you start running things in your mind, trying to work out, okay, so what's likely to be helpful? And then you have what we call compassionate reasoning. How can you reason in a compassionate way? Okay, and there are various ways. And for those of you who are into cognitive therapy, there are many wonderful cognitive therapy interventions that will help you. For the imagery, incidentally, when you're doing compassion for yourself, you might imagine having a conversation with a compassionate other. You might imagine somebody who's very compassionate talking to you, supporting you. And then we have compassionate behavior. What is compassionate behavior? Well, lots of different things, compassionate behavior. There's the doing, but it's also, of course, you could decide, actually, I'm going to go and do more meditation. I'm going to meditate more. I'm going to practice getting my mind more grounded. I'm going to practice doing some of the meditations to perhaps move me towards enlightenment. I'm going to practice. So it can be anything really. But the point about it is these are behaviors that are designed to create, to address, to produce something different. Then we have the sensory, which is to do with how you use your body, like you might use breathing exercises or embodiment exercises. And then we have feelings. Now, the feelings that you have when you are being compassionate really do depend upon what the action is going to be. And I'll explore that with you in a little bit. So there we are. So you've got 6 competencies for action and 6 competencies for engagement. So you can build up compassion, the biology of compassion, firstly, by sensitivity to suffering and wanting to do something about it. You understand the algorithm. That's the basic motive. That's what it is. And then you can begin to say, okay, so let's open that up a little bit and see how we can help us develop our sensitivity. How can we develop our action potential? So it's all, sequence really. And that gives rise to courage, wisdom, and commitment. So getting these qualities will help you become wise in both understanding and taking action. They'll help you develop your courage, and they'll help you develop your commitment. The interesting point, however, for those of you who are therapists, is you will know that for any of these, you can run into these defenses. You can run into dissociation, avoidance, denial, empathy. So what's going on in the Middle East right now is a huge social denial of suffering, and just very, very sad, in the service of vengeance, really. So we know that this happens, and because as psychologists and therapists, all of us, we need to think, okay, so what are we going to do about this stuff? In CFT, we call these FBRs, fears, blocks, and resistances. There they are. Okay, they're tricky, and this is where compassion and compassion science is really key, of actually looking at how can we develop the compassion motivations to be able to address this stuff, because this stuff is often what leads to the harmful side of our minds. We turn off our compassion, we deny it. Okay, we engage in vengeful behavior. Okay, so as I've seen then that compassion can be seen as you can dismiss it because you can see it as not deserved or whatever it is. But once you get it, once you understand that at the heart of compassion is the motives to address and prevent suffering, and therefore compassion takes us towards pain, not away from it. You're moving into something that's distressing, to upsetting, that's hurting you, that's going to make you angry or frightened or whatever it is. And therefore, when we have compassion, it's the most courageous and wisest of all our motives. It is the one that will help us to address suffering. The others won't. Competitive behavior won't. Cooperative behavior won't. Eating behavior won't. Sexual behavior won't. Compassion is the only motive that has the courage and wisdom to actually say no. It's the only motive that will orientate us towards creating a better world. At the end of the day, that is the motive that we need. And when we begin to understand how to stimulate those motives and how to get them to work within our minds and the minds of others, then that's going to be great. So I'm going to do a quick run through of your mind now, because in order for us to get compassion working, we have to get it working in the 4 functions of mind. Now, the 4 functions of mind it's pretty straightforward, really. And it starts off with the fact that, as I said right at the beginning of the talk, the evolved mind, not so much not at all the ground of all consciousness mind, not mine, but the evolved mind has been built by DNA, and it has been built with 3 basic life tasks. All living things have 3 life tasks, all of them. One is protection. All living things must protect themselves. They must detect dangers and do something about it. Even the bacteria in your gut can detect areas that are toxic or too acid, and they can move away. Plants will curl their leaves if there's not enough water, and so on and so on. Protection is one of the most crucial of all motives for all living things, because if you can't do that, if you can't identify a threat to you and take some action, then you won't last very long. Trees have evolved forms of sap that are poisonous to invading insects and that sort of thing. Then the second key life task is you have to acquire resources. You have to eat, don't you? You have to find places to shelter and so on. And if you're a reproducing organism, then you have to find individuals to reproduce with. In other words, you have to find things, go out and find things that are important for your continuing survival. You can't just be avoiding threats. You've got to also get resources. And sometimes when you're getting resources, that will bring you into contact with threat. For example, you might want to go out and feed, but you're in a predator environment. So animals that are feeding in a predator environment, they have to be very cautious when they're looking. So they get these conflicts of motive. So part of their brain has to be monitoring for threat. The other part of their brain has to be monitoring for food. Okay. The brain has to be doing these things at the same time. And when you're working clinically, you'll find that you've often got individuals who are this system of monitoring for threat versus monitoring for things that they need and are important to them, that system is causing them a lot of trouble. Then the third one is called rest and digest. And this system really allows the body to reorganize itself. So when you're not needing to protect yourself, you're not needing to gather resources, you're okay, you're not hungry, whatever it is, then the body goes into rest and digest, and it just settles down, allows you to sleep, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's great. Now, these can be conscious and unconscious. We can have conscious and unconscious sensitivities to threat. We can have conscious and unconscious sensitivity to things that we really want. And these can produce conflicts, right? Now, what they do is they create the four functions of mind. And the four functions of mind mean in order for us to be defend ourselves, we have to be motivated to defend ourselves. Because if we're not bothered, I don't care if I live or die, really, it doesn't matter to me. Then we're not I don't care if my children live or die, it doesn't really matter. If there's no motivation, then nothing else happens. So motivation is crucial to all of those. Being motivated to protect ourselves, being motivated to acquire resources, and being motivated to have times when we can chill out and rest and digest. Emotions, these are the things that come and go. So if I'm threatened, then I might become anxious. Whereas if I achieve what I need to achieve, then I might feel happy. Emotions are bodily states that come on and go off. They're different to motives. Motives guide you, the things you want, and they will guide you through life. So for the whole of your life, you're probably going to be motivated to avoid threats and harms. Whereas emotions like anger, anxiety, they come and they go. They only last a short period of time. So they're quite different to motives. And motives and emotions share a very interesting relationship because certain kinds of motives will make you more vulnerable to certain kinds of emotions. So, for example, if your motives are vengeful, somebody's hurt you and you're motivated to hurt them back, that's going to have a big impact on how your emotions work. On the other hand, if you're motivated to be forgiving, or if you're working with friends, your emotions are going to be quite different. Reasoning, of course, is our ability to think, and all animals have some capacities for thinking and working things out. Humans, it's a big issue. And then there are behaviors. So these are the four functions of mind: what motivates us, how our emotions work, the way we think and work out the world, and the things we actually do. So we can look at it like this then. So here we go then. Here are your motives: harm avoidance, acquiring and resting. And you've also got motives to be caring and cooperating and so on. And then these give rise to our emotions, and our emotions serve our motives, and the emotions come on and they go off. Okay, so I can, according to where we are here, and this gives rise to the three basic types of emotion, because we've got emotions that are linked to harm and threat, anger, anxiety, and so on. Those emotions are usually linked to that motivation. And then we've got emotions that are linked to acquiring things. We call them drive emotions. That's the blue line there. These are things that, that we give us a bit of joy, a bit of happiness, and so on and so on. And then we have emotions that are linked to resting and digesting. And these tend to be ones of feeling content and not really wanting to do anything, just being at peace with oneself. So when we're acquiring things, we can be really hyped up and running around trying to make things happen. Whereas when you're in rest and digest, you're quieter. Then the third function is the cognitive functions. And as I've said, this is to do with our competencies. So birds need wings to fly, but they also need a brain that's going to help those wings move to navigate them in the air. Why they are flying? They're flying to escape a predator or find food or back to the nest. The motive for flying doesn't make any difference to the fact they have to move their wings in a certain way. How they fly, the motive is not linked to the competency. Now, this is important because humans have a range of cognitive competencies, ways of reasoning, mentalizing, which is also empathy, and being consciousness of consciousness, which is mindfulness. So these are your three basic functions of your competencies. Okay. Now this does look quite a lot to take in all in one go, but don't worry about it. you can watch the video again. It's actually quite straightforward when you think about it. So we're able to reason and to think and to plan and so on. This is the scientific mind. So you think, Nobel Prize scientists. Mentalizing, on the other hand, is the capacity to empathize, to understand, to intuit what's happening to other people. And there are two parts to that. One is called emotional resonance, where you can feel what the other person is feeling. And the other one is called perspective taking, where you can see why they think like they're thinking. Now, this is important because these are different talents, right? Your Nobel Prize winner may be a very brilliant at reasoning and thinking through and solving puzzles, but have hardly any empathy at all. They don't really get it, they don't really tune in to the needs or the feelings of others. They might be a little bit on the Asperger or autistic spectrum or whatever it is. So that competency, because it is different to reasoning, means we have problems, particularly in things like politics, where people can be very bright, they can be very intelligent, but they're completely lacking, well, pretty lacking in empathy. They don't really connect to the suffering that their policies are causing. We've had politicians who simply make up these ideologies and without any connection to actually that's going to be very harmful to people. That system doesn't work. And then we have consciousness of consciousness, which is mindfulness. And again, we can have people who can be extremely bright, and we can have people who be very empathic, but they're not terribly mindful. They're not that aware of what's going on in their minds and so on and so on. And so we can train them in mindfulness. And when you train in mindfulness, people can become very good at it, but they may not become better at reasoning, and they may not become better at empathy because they're different systems. And people like Tanya Singer have shown they're different in the brain. And in fact, you can train people in mindfulness, and they can go on and do just be more mindful, more mindfully aggressive, actually. So it's very, very interesting. So the point about it is, and then we have behaviors, right? We've got the behaviors. The point about it is what you want is you need a motive to realize, to work with all of these. So these four functions of mind can be choreographed with the motive. If you think compassion, motivation, how will that affect the emotions that get stimulated in us? How will that affect the way we think? How will that affect the way we empathize and mentalize? How will that affect our mindfulness? If we are orientated to compassion, or supposing we're orientated to competitiveness, we're orientated to be narcissistic, to be number one, screw everybody else. I'm not interested in them. If that's our motive, then all of these are going to be different, aren't they, really? And we also know that all of these can be affected by trauma. So for those of you who are therapists, people's sensitivity to threat, the motivation to deal with threat and spot threat increases. The sensitivity of certain emotions increase, the ability to feel safe is reduced. That this capacity, this system gets expanded, and this system, the rest and digest, it doesn't work very well at all. And the way in which they reason and mentalize is affected by their trauma. So again, the motivation, this motivation to address suffering, blah, 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 versus say competitive, has a massive impact on how your brain is organized, how your emotions are organized, how the ways you think is organized, the things you would do. All right. So compassion motivation absolutely runs the show. Okay. So here's an example. All right. This is competitive mentality. When we're competing, we're thinking about getting on in the world. We have to compare ourselves to other people and so on and so on. Now, when people get depressed, they have a sense of being inferior to others, down rank, and so on and so on. But then for individuals who are focused on up rank, they are what we call the narcissists, psychopaths of the world. And their motivation is really to be superior. They have a sense of entitlement. They tend to be aggressive and striving. Okay. And if things go wrong, they blame others. And you probably are aware of a few politicians in the world who are very much their up rank competitive psychology. They use an up rank competitive motivational system. They're trapped in that. Now, if you take the Buddhist position, They didn't choose to have a mind like that, but that is what their brain is doing, because their brain is orientated to this motivational system. And as I say, if anybody criticizes them, or they never take responsibility, they always blame other people. So you can usually tell that. Whereas the submissives, the low rankers, they always blame themselves. But what you're wanting to do, of course, is to get them out of that motivational system. You don't want to fiddle around too much with that motivational system. So when we do the therapy, we're not trying to challenge stuff within that system. We want them out of that system. We want them to stimulate a different motivational system, which allows them to be more sensitive to distress. They have to do more empathic work, and they have to be sensitive to their own distress, because we know that people, narcissists and so forth, have not processed their own trauma. They've defended against it. They haven't processed it. And because they've shut off from their own pain, they're not able to be in touch with the pain they cause others. Okay, so it's a serious problem when you're working with these individuals, because trying to help them to be compassionate when they're not, that they're very invested in avoiding the pain that they feel, is very, very tricky. I mean, there's a very famous politician in America. We won't talk too much about that individuals, but we know his background was shocking. But of course, he's never done any work on it at all. So there we are. All right, so just being aware then that with the 4 functions of mind, your motives, the motive of compassion, will regulate so much of what you do. Now, keep in mind that we're moving towards the time when we can get a framework for what we're doing, so that when we come to practice compassionate mind training from a biological point of view, we know we're going to train the 4 functions of mind. We're going to train our compassionate motives. We're going to train compassionate emotions. We're going to train compassionate thinking and mindfulness and so on. And we're going to train compassionate behaviors. All right. So we're coming up, remember, 1:45. We've got our first break, in case you're thinking, oh my God, how long is he going to go on for? So the next thing then is, let's have a look. How do we get from caring to compassion? This is very, very important. Well, we know that compassion in the brain is associated with a number of physiological systems, such as the vagus nerve, which I'll talk about in a moment. And there are hormones such as oxytocin, and there are various neurocircuits, particularly in your frontal cortex, just above your eyes. And there are epigenetics. This is the way genes get changed. These are important for compassion, but actually they are not compassion. They are caring. And you'll see these in many, many other animals. Okay. So what is it that turns caring into compassion? Well, what turns caring into compassion is when we use our new brain competencies of knowing awareness, empathic awareness, and knowing intentionality. So when we're doing things on purpose, deliberately, like mindfulness is an awareness on purpose. Compassion is when we're using our mind purposely to be able to address and relieve suffering. That's when we get to compassion. And that's important because, whoops, that's important because compassion is also linked to an awareness of suffering. Now, if, for example, you like growing vegetables and you have got fantastic marrows or tomatoes or something like that, and they get damaged in a storm, you would be upset for yourself, but you wouldn't be upset for them. You wouldn't be compassionate to your tomatoes or your marrows. You wouldn't say, oh, marrow, I'm so sorry. You must be in so much pain. The storm has really uprooted you. I feel for you, marrow. You wouldn't be like that, because you don't think your marrow has any consciousness. It can't suffer. It's not, your marrow is not experiencing suffering, right? It's only when we sense the experience of suffering, which is a consciousness experience. So in consciousness, there is an experience of pain. That's when compassion arises. Everything else is caring. For example, if you crash your car, you might be very unhappy about your car, feel very sad about your car, but you won't feel compassion for it. You know, oh, my car, I'm so sorry. You must be really badly hurting. I can see you've lost a tire and the front banner is all smashed in. And look at the door. It doesn't. Oh, I'm so sorry. The pain you must be in. So compassion then really is 2 things, right? Firstly, the motivation for caring and the physiology of caring. But then you need the human abilities to understand and to reason to know. And then you need the capacity to understand compassion is about suffering. conscious suffering. It's not just about caring, it's about conscious suffering. And therefore, we say caring can be automatic, linked to various behavioral programs. And you can see it in many species. Rats will look after their pups and so forth. But compassion is when we use our new brain competency to purposely and empathically and wisely identify suffering and its causes. We try and work it out. That's what medicine is all about, isn't it? And then courageously engage with it and dedicate ourselves to wisely work out how to be helpful. So it's very important to make these distinctions between caring behavior and compassionate behavior. So compassionate behavior is clearly caring, but it's actually moving it on. It's like cruelty has to be rooted in an understanding of suffering. Okay, animals that just rip their prey to pieces and cause immense suffering, we wouldn't call that cruel, because they're not doing that on purpose. They don't know what they're doing. They're not really in tuning themselves to their prey. You know, when a lion takes down a zebra, the lion isn't saying to the zebra, look, I'm so sorry about this, you know, but I have to eat, you know, but children got to eat, so I got to kill you, you know. I feel really bad about it, but a lion can't do that. A lion can't decide, you know what, I don't like this, I'm going to become a vegetarian, you know, all this killing stuff. I mean, lions have got a terrible reputation, you know what I mean? As a lion, I want to change the way we are. You know, lions can't do that because they don't have that degree of insight. Humans do. And the whole point about in the Buddhist traditions and in the moral traditions, how do we use our brain and insight to bring compassion into the world? We're the only species that can do it. No other species can do it. We are the only ones that can do that, right? And that's why it's so fundamental that we do that. No other species can understand diseases and take action against diseases. No other species could come up with a vaccine against COVID. We are the only ones that can do that. So how we use our minds really is really, really crucial. And again, compassion is central because we can also use our minds to come up with the most horrific tortures and violence and nasties. Okay. Now, in terms of thinking about the other aspects of compassion, it takes us into things such as attachment theory. Okay. Right. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip attachment theory because of time concerns, because I want to get you into practices this afternoon, but it'll all be in your PowerPoints. But all this basically is saying that the attachment system meant that the parent provided some very important qualities to the infant for them to grow. So firstly, the infant has to stay close to the mother, primarily. And then there is a secure base. Now, a secure base means that the infant can grow and they're protected and they're provisioned. They don't have to go and find their own food. They don't have to fight off their own predators. The parent will do all that. So the infant doesn't have to worry about anything at all. They can simply grow and learn how to walk and move around and think about the world. And a secure base does that. And the safe haven is the part of the caring system that actually then calms the infant down if they get distressed. So caring behavior at a psychological level will involve both of these things. And so we can see this here. Should I show you this video? It's quite yeah, I'll show it to you after the break. So basically what this means is that when we're working clinically and when we're working with people, when we create a safe base and a secure base for people, what it means is that we're able to encourage them. People can be encouraged to face things that are difficult. Okay, that's part of compassion, isn't it? Right? The courage to engage pain. And when people have a secure base, that's what you do for your kids. You encourage them to have a go, you know, going to school. They might not want to go to school, so you encourage them to think, to try out different things, to develop their wisdom and courage. Then another aspect of a secure base is validation. People learn to understand their emotions, and the mother and parents validate the child. I can understand how you feel, because the child feels mentalized. The child feels understood. So that has to be a key quality of compassion, doesn't it, really? The ability to feel understood and to be understanding. Okay? How can you be compassionate if you can't validate or mentalize? How can you do that, right? It's very difficult. the ability to regulate one's emotions. How can you be compassionate if you can't regulate your emotions? You know, we have a list, and there's been some heavy exchanges in regard to Middle East politics, and some of the individuals just have not been able to regulate their emotions. And then a third aspect, which is often not seen as part of compassion, but it is really, is the ability for playfulness and joyfulness. Now that's important because these qualities help you to flourish. They give you a sense of connectedness to the world, and they're actually quite important, I think, for the capacity to have enlightenment, because enlightened experience, when you have an enlightened experience, a non-duality experience, this is what you feel. There's a great sense of joyful playfulness, a great sense of pleasure, a great sense of interconnectedness. Also creativity, actually, some people talk about. Not so much individuation, obviously. More loss of the sense of the individual, but the still a sense of your consciousness is experiencing. So it's a very different, it's not like your consciousness no longer exists, nothing exists, you exist, but your consciousness is being textured in a different way. So Matthew Ricard says, you know, your mind is like water. Water can contain a medicine or a poison, but it is neither of those things. And because water is clear, it can't always understand itself because it's clear. And when a poison or a medicine turns up, it thinks, oh, so that's what I must be then. I must be a poison. No. Oh, well, maybe I'm the medicine then. I'm a medicine. Yes, I am a medicine. No, you're water. Yeah, but that's just clear. So anyway, you can get into all this stuff. And then, of course, you have these other elements which are to do with how the parent supports and brings the individual who is very distressed infant into some kind of relationship of grounding. All right, so I'm going to just jump now, if you will forgive me. Just come out of here a little bit. No, I've got to go through here. I might be able to come back to this later. But what I want to be able to do now is talk to you a little bit about brain states. Because now that we've done the 4 functions of mind, we can have a look at compassion as a brain state. Now, brain state theory, I'm a brain state theorist, and I've always been a brain state theorist, can appear very complicated, but it isn't really. It's simply highlighting the fact that your functions of mind form patterns. Okay? So let's have a look here. Let's take a threat state. Then when you're in a threat state, okay, you'll be paying attention in a particular kind of way. You'll be thinking in a particular kind of way. Your emotions are organized. You're motivated to escape or do whatever it is. Can you see then that a threat state organizes all of these functions, doesn't it, really? You don't just have negative thoughts. You don't just have anxious feelings. You don't just have empty imagery. You don't just want to do nothing, mostly not. So the point about it is to recognize then that as we go moment by moment, our brain is in a constant pattern generating process. It's constantly generating patterns of how we're paying attention, what we're thinking, the emotions that are coming on and going off in us. And this is important for mindfulness because sometimes people say, oh, pay attention to your thoughts. Well, that's okay. But in CFT, we say pay attention to your brain state. Okay. So clearly, when you're in a happy brain state, all of this changes now. The pattern of these processes will now change in your brain when you're in a compassionate brain state, and then when you're in a self-critical brain state, and then when you're a self-compassionate brain state, okay? So the point about it is to try to help us to recognize that although psychotherapy has tended to split up the mind, so you've got cognitive approaches or emotional-based approaches or body-based approaches, actually in compassion and compassion therapies, you have to see how they relate, because it's the relationship between your thinking and your emotions and your behavior and your memories, and that's what gives rise to the state, all right, the brain state. And after the break, the point that we're going to be saying to you is this, that when you are addressing or creating compassionate minds, and you want it to do work, you want it to help you with the darker sides of your mind or your threat mind, you want it to change your brain state. You're not just changing your cognitions or your attention or your emotions, you're changing all of them. You're changing a pattern in your brain. Okay, you're changing a pattern of thinking, a pattern of attention, a pattern of feeling in your body. And therefore, when we do the exercises, as we will after the break, we're going to be focusing on creating patterns. How do we do compassionate attention? How do we do compassionate body? How do we do compassionate behavior? All right. And so we're going to be addressing compassion because we want to create a compassionate brain state. Because when you've got a compassionate brain state, that brain state and that motivational state will help you with some of the darker and more difficult aspects of your brain. All right. Okay. So as I promised Amber, we have got a coffee break coming up now for about a quarter of an hour. So just maybe a little less. So we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock. And then we'll move into some practices so that you can begin to practice this compassionate motivation, compassionate focusing. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. For those of you that have got your cameras on, if you wouldn't mind just turning them off, just so we can all have a safe break, that would be lovely. Thank you. And back for 2 o'clock, please. I'll pop it in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break, managed to get yourself a drink. We're together just for another hour, so if you do need to step away in that time, that's absolutely fine. Just do whatever you need to do to look after you. For those that can turn cameras on, that'll be wonderful. It's always lovely to be able to see you, but appreciate some of you that might be a little bit tricky this afternoon, so thank you. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded and it will be sent out to you. So for anybody that is needing to leave early or missing anything, then that is going to be available to you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Amber. Do you have any questions before we start? Okay, all righty ho. So we will now move towards more practice. Slow down a bit and do some practice. Okay. Okay, so let's just see where we are now. So up until this point, we've been looking at what compassion is and how it's emotive and it organizes our minds, and how we can use the four functions of mind really to support the motive, the way we think, how our emotions are, what we do. And so what we want to do now is just to look at that in a little bit more detail. Okay. So as we've seen, that basically our minds create all kinds of patterns, and really CFT is all about patterning, really. And we become conscious of those patterns and can have emotions and feeling. So getting to understand how these patterns are generated within us and how we can change them is part of what we do in compassionate mind training. You don't just let this brain pattern emerge, but you try to think what you can do to change it. So I'm going to do a little exercise with you now. So get ready for some exercises. Okay, ready for some exercise. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to invite you to think about certain things and then just observe what happens in your body and your mind. So what I'm going to invite you to do first is the first scenario is you have a small worry. Now, nothing too major, but for the moment, just bring that worry to mind and just focus on it. Don't do this for very long, just a few seconds. Notice what you're paying attention to, what's in your mind, what are you thinking? What are the emotions and what do you want to do? Okay. Okay, so now just take a breath, let that worry go. Think of your favorite wallpaper or something like that. Just to flush through. Right now, the next thing then, scenario 2 is someone's annoyed you. Again, not a major row that you want to, take a baseball bat to their head or something like that. It's a bit too, that would be a bit too much. But a bit of a they really annoyed you. So maybe bring to mind how you want to kind of put them straight or tell them how they've annoyed you or whatever. But just now, just focus a little bit on feelings of anger, really. Okay, so once again, then just pull out of that and just now become mindful. This is when we reflect. So we move out of the emotion. And now with our conscious mind, we reflect on what happened. Where was your attention? So you can say to yourself, oh, when I was thinking about my anger, I was attending to this. I was thinking this. I was feeling this in my body. So this is the part of you that becomes aware of this brain state. Okay, so now I'm going to go to scenario 3. So now sitting in your chair and just imagine that tomorrow you're going on a holiday that you've been planning for a while and you're really looking forward to it. Okay, something exciting. You're going on this holiday, maybe going skiing, or you're going somewhere warm, or you're going up to a country cottage in the lakes, or wherever it is. Whatever. Bring to mind where you're planning to go and what you're looking forward to doing. Okay, so once again, then notice when you were on your excitement, what was happening in your brain and your body, what you were paying attention to, what pictures were coming into your mind, what images were coming into your mind, what thoughts were you having about, maybe part of you started to worry, I've got to get the passport sorted out, I've got to do this, I've got to do. But this part of you is the observer part. You observe what happened whilst you were thinking about your holiday, and you observe what happened, how your mind went, how your mind created a brain state. Your mind created the brain state of going on holiday with a bit of excitement, a bit of this imagery, a bit of that thinking, a bit of that attention, didn't it really? Okay, so we're not going to invite you to do this today because this is an erotic one, but you can do this when you're at home, just for fun. Okay, these are all for fun, really. Bring to mind something that's a bit erotic to you. Okay, now the reason for doing that is because it can be quite fun, but also you will notice that if you become aroused because of your imagery, you have moved blood flow around in your body, and you put blood flow to certain parts of your body because that's how you get aroused. That's extraordinary, actually, if you think about it. Your own mind, on purpose, has changed the blood flow in your body to create an experience that you wanted to create. That's amazing. You can purposely choose to use your mind to change the blood flow in your body to create a feeling that you deliberately want to create. Amazing, isn't it, really? The power of the mind, isn't it? But the key thing is that you're doing that on purpose, knowing what you're doing, knowing why you're doing it, and knowing how to do it. And when we use our mind like that, that's a wisdom. Now, the first two are probably not things you want to do. They're things that will take you over. You don't normally think to yourself, I think I fancy having a worry. You know what I mean? I really fancy a worry. I'm going to sit here and worry. Usually, worry and anger, you don't choose those. They're not purposeful. You don't choose to think, I'm feeling pretty good now, but you know what? I think I'm going to focus on saying it's really annoyed me so I can get into a real rage, a fancier rage. You know what I mean? So a lot of our threat emotions we don't choose. They just turn up and they do their stuff and they change our body even when we don't want them to. Sometimes even the good things like a holiday will just pop into your mind. You're wanting to get to sleep, but you're laying in bed and then you get excited. But we can also have situations like a sexual excitation where we do want to create a feeling on purpose. We might want to go to the movies because deliberately we want to create a feeling on purpose. We do things because we knowingly, intentionally want to create an experience. So that's important that we make a distinction between experiences that we deliberately seek to create and those that just turn up and can cause us all kinds of trouble, uh, like anxiety, like rage. All those emotions generally are not chosen, like depression. Nobody goes on a course, do they? Or a panic attacks. My life is so boring. I'm going to go on to a retreat. I'm going to go to one of Paul Gilbert's retreats to find out how to scare the shit out of myself. You know what I mean? I need to have some panics in my life. So there's a big difference, right, between brain states that go click like that when we don't want them to, and then we can get stuck in them and ruminate about them, as opposed to brain states that we do want, and we can plan to trigger them by doing certain things and behaving in certain ways and so on and so on. Okay, so this is important. And then we can begin to see that actually compassionate brain states can help us with some of the brain states we don't want. Compassion can help us with states like anxiety or like anger. We can choose to use that brain state. Let's have a look at some compassion stuff now to show you again how powerful it is. Okay, so I missed out that slide. Never mind. So I explain to you. Okay, I'd like you to just for a moment imagine that you were worried about something, and you talked to a friend, somebody you really liked, and that friend was really helpful to you. They helped you, right? And you're just reflecting on how helpful your friend was. Okay. Now, again, we can choose to do this. Sometimes it's called gratitude. Gratitude exercise is good, but you got to do gratitude not because you think you ought to do. I ought to be grateful. That doesn't work at all. But when it's a friendly, oh yeah, that was kind of cool. When it's really friendly sort of sense of she or he was really helpful. Just focusing on that memory. This was somebody that really helped you. And notice what you're thinking, what you're focusing your attention, what's going through your mind. So we know then that when we focus on the helpfulness of others, and some people are not helpful, are they? They're real toadies. Some people are bastards, actually a real pain in the asses. But people can also be very helpful from the way that you're served in the supermarket, the way this person smiles at you and helps you, the perception of helpfulness of others, right? Learning to pay attention to the helpfulness of others, holding the helpfulness of others in your mind, because when you do that, you will start creating brain states, right? Because what we know is that we tend to pass over the helpfulness of others and tend to focus on others when they're a pain, because our threat system is like that. That's how our threat system works. And we often use the story of the Sunday painters, as the Christmas shoppers. If you go shopping and you go into 10 shops, and in 9 of the shops, the assistants are really helpful to you. But in one of these shops, the assistant is very rude. They keep you waiting while they're talking to a friend about a party. And when you ask them to help you find something in the store, they say, "Oh, I don't think we've got that." And then you say, "Yes, you have. You've got it in the window." Oh, do you? And then you give them £10 or $10 and they give you change for 5. and they try and cheat you, and you say, look, I gave you 10. They say, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. You didn't. I was very careful when you gave me the money. You definitely only gave me 5. And you know that you didn't, right? So you have a bit of an eye on them. Anyway, the point about it is that person really annoys you because they treat you with disrespect and they try to cheat you. So you're coming out of the shop and you're really angry. Then you go home. Who are you thinking about? When your partner comes in and says, oh, what kind of day have you had? You say, okay, I've got a few presents, but God, oh dear, dear. I must tell you about this shop I went into. This bloody assistant, she treated me like a piece of shit, like I was nothing. I mean, it's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. How do they get away with it? Rabbit, 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 rabbit. Why? Why do we do that? We do that because our brain is designed to do this. Not your fault, right? Your brain will hold on to the negative. Rick Hansen has a saying, that the brain is Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. We have a tendency, the threat system, that harm avoidance, that harm engagement system tends to be stronger than the others, actually. So we have to be careful about that. So we have to notice when that's happening. So let's assume that we've been doing mindfulness now. So in mindful, we can see, oh, I see my brain has got hooked up into my rage with this assistant. Okay. Actually, it's not very good for it's not very good for me, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deliberately, on purpose, remember and go through all the other 9 people that helped me. And I'm going to look at all the presents I've got that I'm so pleased with. I'm going to deliberately cultivate brain states that are going to help me rather than allow myself to settle in and sink in to my rage, which is not going to help me. Maybe justified. It might be justified, and rage can be extremely addictive. It holds you. It's like Velcro. It's got you. But actually, when you see it, you think, yes, okay, I've got every right to be angry. I could do that. But actually, I think in order for me to have the brain that I want to have, rather than letting the anger decide on my brain state, I think I want to decide. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to refocus. So one of the things that we refocus on, many things that we can refocus on in compassion, is to remember the helpfulness of others. Remember the good things, not just the bad things that you do. It's very easy for us to focus on the things we're annoyed about, but can we remember the things we're pleased about? And this is really important within relationships, For relationships to work, how do people appreciate each other? It's all very well focusing on things you don't like, but are we able to appreciate the other? So that's important, and that we see that when we focus on receiving compassion, it can be quite helpful. So the next one, which you could probably have gathered, obviously. Oops, what's happening there? Sorry. So the next one is this one. A friend of yours was worried or upset, and you were able to help them. You were able to take your friend to hospital, and they had a very successful operation, and now they're feeling better than they've felt for a long time. And they come to you and they say, Sally, I'm so pleased you were, and you say, excuse me, my name's not Sally. Just joking. They come to you and they say, thank you so much for helping me out because I was in such a state and you helped me get to the hospital. I've had the operation. I'm just feeling good, You've been such a wonderful friend. Thank you so much. Notice how you feel, right? How does that feel to you? We call this is the joy of compassion, because we often focus on the suffering of compassion and getting into, and that's true, but there's also great joy in compassion. There's a great meaning in compassion, the awareness that we can be helpful to others and the ability to appreciate our own helpfulness. Very important, And sometimes we dismiss it. Oh, anybody would have done that. I don't know. Maybe they would. I don't know, but just take the joy. I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. Yeah, I'm really good. I'm so pleased you had the operation. You're feeling better. Great. I'm really glad I could help you. That's good. Gives me a sense of purpose and meaning in my life. So you have this playfulness, this pleasure around it, right? Learning how to create these experiences around compassion, the joyfulness of compassion, the the pleasure of being helpful, the sense of meaning that it gives you. Here's another example for meaning. Imagine that you're going to a party and you're really looking forward to this party because maybe a friend of you is, having a birthday party, a 50th or a 30th or whatever it is. So you've been looking forward to it for a while. And then another friend phones you up and they say, look, as you know, I'm going through a divorce and I've just had a terrible letter from somebody, my solicitors or whatever. I'm just in a terrible state. I don't know. Is there any chance you could come over? I just need somebody, just need to be able to talk to somebody. So what do? You could say, look, I'm terribly sorry. I'm sure you'll be all right till the morning. I've got a party. I want to go to this party. The chances are, assuming that you're not all narcissists, the chances are you think, oh, bugger it. So you'd be irritated. And then you say, okay. But you'd go to your friends because you kind of feel you should go to your friends. Don't really want to go to your friends, but okay. So you go to your friends, and when you're with your friend, you try to be really helpful and supportive and listening and everything. Okay, because that's really what you want. You don't deny your distress. You don't deny your disappointment. You accept it, all right? But you go anyway. Okay, so 6 months have gone past, and your friend has come through the problem now, and they say to you, guy, remember that night you came out to help me, How are you going to feel now? Are you going to regret not going to the party? Or are you pleased that you went and helped your friend? What would be more meaningful to you in your life? Right? So these are important awarenesses of compassion. When we give up stuff to help others, and we do help others, we can take a joy from that. And even if at the time we think, oh shit, still have to do that, it's all right. That doesn't affect compassion because we have a multiple mind. We have minds that are like this, right? But we can still take joy from the fact and meaning from the fact that, yeah, I did give up my party night and that was a pain. But on the other hand, I'm also pleased I did because that's meaningful. That was important. And if it was the other way around, I'd like somebody to do it for me. So gratitude and taking the joy of helping, these are parts of compassion, and they will have an impact on your brain states if you practice them, right? Don't dismiss gratitude and don't dismiss the joy of helping and the meaning of helping. After all, that's why we have the health professions. Why? Because people want to be helpful. There is a basic psychology to humans, not all humans, I have to say, some are not quite like that, but many people want to be helpful. Many people get joy from being helpful, and many people get joy from being helped. So this is a very important psychology. So when I started at the beginning and said that biologically we have the potential, we do. There's no question about that. We do, and we have a brain, remember, that can think about it and plan it out, knowing awareness and do all that stuff. It's just that we also have a brain that can do some pretty horrible stuff as well. All right, so that gives you a little bit of background to these brain states. Okay, and this is just another way of doing the same thing. We're not going to go into this, but it's just basically saying the same thing. That if you see a nice meal, this will trigger your emotional brain, but you could just imagine a nice meal, and that would trigger your saliva as well. You could see something sexy on the television or your partner could take their clothes off or something, and that would trigger your arousal, your blood flow but you could just lay in bed by yourself and imagine it. The issue is also that if somebody's bullying you and threatening you and putting you down, this will make you frightened or depressed or maybe angry. But of course, you can imagine it. And you can do it to yourself. You can be critical and harsh on yourself. Now, if you're critical and harsh on yourself, you're only going to stimulate these pathways. Okay? People often think that being harshly self-critical is just trying to help you and whatever. Well, it isn't. And so if you come on our self-criticism training, you'll see that harsh forms of self-criticism are not trying to help you because they're threat-based. They're all in the threat system. It will make you unthink. But we also know that when people are kind and warm and helpful to you, remember, those are ways of being compassionate. It's not compassion itself, but they're ways of being compassionate. This will help you feel better. You're struggling, particularly if you trust people. If you don't trust them, that's not so good. But equally, if you imagine, if you do it for yourself, if you learn to speak to yourself, if you learn to create compassionate imagery for yourself, if you learn to pay attention, if you learn how to use your body for compassion, if you practice doing that, that will settle down your threat system.
Paul, can I just come in with something that's been asked in the chat, if that's
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So Leah's just popped. How about those who overextend? Can you please share implications of this in the same manner as what you're mentioning now about skills and benefits of compassion, despite potentially feeling negative?
Okay. So these are people who always put other people first.
That's what I've taken from it. Leah, I don't know if you're able to come in and expand, but that's, yeah, that was my, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so yes, compassion motivation can be for many, many reasons, of course. One of the reasons is because it's not based on a genuine empathy and the desire and the joy, right? It's not based on, it's a desire to be liked and to be wanted. And we've done studies on that. And so there are some individuals who will always try to be Mrs. and Mr. Kind because they're very frightened of being rejected. They want to earn a good reputation. Okay, so they overextend and so forth. And there's also individuals who are not terribly good at understanding self-compassion or compassion for the self, which is respect for the self, right? You know, it's all very well to run a marathon, but it's not probably too good to run 2 marathons on a go because your body's not going to do that. So when you're working with that clinically and you pick that up, then you would explore that with the client. You would explore with the client. Do you ever say no to people? Do you ever actually think, actually, this is probably going to exhaust me a bit too much? You know what I mean? So I think this time probably I will give it a miss. What would worry you about that? What would upset you about that? Okay, because the other thing is it your definition of overextending or is it their definition of overextending? Because they may say, yes, I know I exhaust myself, but it's very important to me. It gives me a lot of meaning. Okay. So it's a great question because it's a tricky question because there are many, many different elements to it. I've certainly known people who are rushing around all the time, but they love it. That's the way they are. They want to be like that. They would not take to me to try to stop them from being that, and that's the way they want to be, so be it. It's for those individuals who are getting depressed and exhausted and becoming self-critical and who recognize that there's a bit of an issue. Okay, or those individuals who are extending in one direction but they're not actually meeting their other criteria. For example, sometimes you have people who are highly committed to being politicians or charity workers. Great, but then they don't pay any attention to their families. So it's a brilliant question, but it's a complicated answer because a lot depends upon the nature of the overextension, the reasons they're extending, the implications for inviting to explore that. What would it mean if they actually pull back a little bit, all that stuff, right? Okay, is that okay? Does that answer your question a bit?
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, because you do find some people that just seem to be always on the go, but that's how they want to live their lives. So it's a great question because the point at which you want to try to intervene with somebody who's chosen to do that is sometimes a little tricky because you have to do quite a lot of Socratic questioning and guided discovery to explore what that's about and you know whether or not they were like that as children to get their mothers to love them or whatever. So it's a brilliant question, but lots of different processes can be involved in that. Okay. So remember then there's always flow. It's compassion to self from others and to others. And cultures and politics and religions can have a big impact on that. So there are some cultures, for example, religious cultures where treatment of women are just appalling. That's in the culture. And there are other cultures where treatment of women is much better. Not great, but better. There are some cultures which overvalues the self so it becomes narcissistic, which is not self-compassionate. Narcissism can look like self-compassion, but it isn't. And narcissists can score quite highly on things like self-compassion scales, but they're not self-compassionate, actually. Okay. So as we've said, your 4 functions of mind. So building compassion motivation, why would you want to do that? Well, because it has a lot of benefits to you in terms of what happens in your brain, what happens in your body, how you'll feel. Okay. Compassion motivation, which is based upon things like because God wants me to be compassionate, that's a little bit tricky. So you want what is called internalized motive, not externalized motive. I want to be compassionate because then people like me, won't they? They think I'm really lovely. Externalized motivation can be a little bit tricky. We've all got it. I mean, of course, we want people to like us. Of course, we do. But just be aware you want internalized motivation, a genuine desire to be compassionate, and you see the value of it really. The old idea of be the change you want to see in the world. So I'd like to live in a compassionate world. So maybe I want to start to behave a bit compassionately. Then you have compassion emotion. Now, compassion emotion really depends upon the situation. So if you're a firefighter, your emotions are going to be one of anxiety, aren't they? And concern, but you learn how to regulate those emotions in order to go into the burning house and save somebody. Compassion emotion, if you are counseling a dying client, is not the same as a firefighter. And you don't turn up in the same gear as a firefighter either, do you? You wear different clothes. So the compassion emotion may well be one of sadness, and grieving, particularly if you've had a connection with your client for a while. It can be a really sad emotion. I remember a client, talking about whether you should ever hug a client, and this is a client who had worked very hard to get pregnant, and she was very anxious about it and so forth. Anyway, she got pregnant. And I'd seen her a couple of years on and off. She had a lot of anxiety and stuff like that. Anyway, so she got pregnant. She came in. She was very excited. Blah 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 blah. 3 months, I think, maybe 4 months. She came in and just opened the door with tears in her eyes and said, "Paul, I've lost my baby." And then at that point, the only thing I could do was just hug her. I couldn't do anything else. I mean, it was just a natural thing. And she just cried and cried and cried. Right. So that's an example which is very different to the firefighter, isn't it? So the emotion that you experience in any compassion encounter depends upon the encounter. There is no compassion emotion. There isn't. It doesn't exist. What there are is emotions that are triggered by the context in which suffering occurs and you engage with it. Okay, very important that, this idea that compassion is an emotion. No, it's not. It's not an emotion. It's a motive. And out of that motive, that orientation, engagement, you get all kinds of emotions that happen sometimes. Sometimes you get emotions like when people tell you stories of abuse, you can feel very angry for that client because you get your sympathetic reaction. Oh my God, the way people treat children, I think it's just okay. So then you have compassionate ways of thinking, right? Is this thinking going to help me? Does it move me forward? Is it reasonable? All of the cognitive stuff, right, comes into that. Making sure you're not thinking in black and white terms or overgeneralizing. All of that, all of those cognitive ways of thinking of challenging thinking will help you. Then we have compassionate ways of behaving. And compassionate ways of behaving is also thinking about how you want to develop your behavior. Okay, so we're going to have a look at some of those as we go through. Okay, so this is the thing. When you've got these models of mind, that can help you. So, for example, in the Christian death, people, you might think common humanity, you know, this is a point of suffering. Lots of people can suffer the same way I do, which gives you a sense of connectedness to others. That might be a very helpful way of thinking compassionately. All right. Okay. So now we're going to do practices. So the first thing is, how do we use the body to support the mind? Okay, because we want to use the body. You've got some slides that talk about body. We didn't have time to go into them today, but so I'm going to invite you now because we want to help. Actually, I'll just show you this very quickly because I need to show you this. So just jumping about, it's awful, isn't it, really? This is your autonomic nervous system, and you have two parts to it: your sympathetic nervous system here, and your parasympathetic nervous system here. And basically, your sympathetic nervous system is your action system for activating your heart and all that. And your parasympathetic is a slowing system, basically. Anyway, you'll be able to read it all in the slides and everything. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to balance the autonomic system so that the sympathetic and the parasympathetic work nicely together. Because when they work nicely together, you get what is called good heart rate variability. Okay, now heart rate variability means that when the sympathetic system is in charge, your heart rate will speed up. Blah, boom, blah, boom, blah, boom. When your parasympathetic system is in charge, your heart rate will slow down. So over time, your heart rate is speeding up slightly and then slowing down slightly, speeding up slightly and then slowing down slightly. Now, when you get stressed, two things happen. One is your heart rate can speed up slightly, the sympathetic system starts to get going, and your parasympathetic system does not regulate it. It backs off slightly. Okay? And then your heart rate tends to be regular. Boom, 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 boom. But when you're in balance, when your parasympathetic and your sympathetic are balancing, you get what is called heart rate variability. And the reason for that is because your heart rate is increasing slightly, bum, 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 bum. But then the parasympathetic system says, hang on a moment, that's a little bit too fast. I'm going to slow it down. And so it slows it down very slightly over a couple of beats. And then the sympathetic system says, hang on a moment, that's a bit too slow. I'm going to speed you up. A couple of beats. And then the parasympathetic says, whoa, we're just a bit too fast. I'm going to slow you down. And so what happens is you get an interbeat interval variation. This is not the same gap. Sometimes it's a little quicker, sometimes it's a little slower. And that's called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is linked to a whole lot of stuff, right? It's basically good for you, and it means your system's in balance. And there we are. These are some of the things that it's linked to: experiencing calmer states, more positive states, lower blood pressure, better gut functioning. And how do you get it? How do we get this balance? Okay, this balance is going to focus on the vagus nerve, but it is really to balance, because sometimes compassion is going to be activating, isn't it? But it's going to balance it. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So I should have explained that to you before, but being well organized, as I missed that bit out. All right. Oops, where have I gone to? So we're going to be doing stuff that really does stimulate the vagus. But remember, it's not a one thing show. It's really the autonomic nervous system is like an orchestra, and it's about how things work in balance. In order to feel grounded in the body, we want that autonomic nervous system to be balanced, and we want the vagus nerve to be, working well. And that when we're stressed and when we've been traumatized and when we've got mental health problems, the vagus nerve doesn't work so good. So you want to be able to work it and stimulate it. So this is what we're going to be doing. So the first thing then is we're going to be doing some breathing exercises and movement exercises to help with this vagus. All right. So the first thing is your posture is to lift your shoulders up and back. Don't lean against the back of the chair. Your shoulders should be up and back. And when that happens, you will see that your chest opens. Okay. And you have a curve pointing inwards. Your lower back now curves inwards. Whereas when your bending over your computer, your curve will point outwards. Your lower back points outwards. But when you lift your shoulders up and back, your curve, the curve of your back points inwards. And that's important because that lifts your diaphragm. So the open chest and the lifting of your diaphragm are very important for stimulating the vagus nerve. Because the vagus nerve is linked to your diaphragm, and your diaphragm sits just below your ribs in the V, upside down V of your ribs. That's where your diaphragm sits. So we create the posture for a breathing practice that stimulates the vagus. That posture is very, very important. All right, so the next thing I'm going to invite you to do is we're going to breathe. Now, there are different styles of breathing that you can get on the internet, and to some degree, it's quite useful to go and find one that you like. Some of the breathing exercises suggest that you have a shorter in-breath and a longer out-breath. That's good. Yes, absolutely good. But the one I'm going to take you through is the 5 and 5, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. It's a very basic beginner's breath if you want. What's that doing there, Charlotte? I don't know what's this doing. Let me just come out of that. I've never seen that before, Charlotte. Anyway, hang on a minute. I get. Just ignore that. I don't know what that's doing there. It's from another slide. So I'm going to count you into that. Now, the idea is to just settle at the top of the breath and settle at the bottom of the breath. And what? Oh yeah, I haven't put it there. What we're going to be doing is to look at 3 things to do with your breath: the rhythm of your breath, the rate of your breath, and the depth of your breath. So you're going to be breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. We're going to go for about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, which will be about 4 seconds, 3 to 4 breaths per minute. You're going to focus on the air coming into your lungs, filling your lungs, and imagining it going to the base of your spine. And then the air should come out smoothly. Okay, a nice smooth exit. So relatively feel your lungs. Don't do a half fill and things. So relatively feel your lungs. No movement in the upper part of your chest. Everything is down in the diaphragm. You might even want to put your hand on your diaphragm. Just feel your diaphragm doing the breathing. And imagining that air coming down. So remember then, the rate of the breath is about 3 to 4 breaths per minute. Okay. The depth of the breath is imagining the breath coming right down into your diaphragm and then imagining it going to the base of your spine. Okay, and then the smoothness of the breath is it should be nice and smooth in with a little weighting at the top of the breath, and then a nice smooth out with a little weighting at the bottom of the breath. Okay, and the idea is really for you to begin to feel your way into a breathing pattern that you can sense in your body. Sense it in your body. Okay, so we're going to do that. Then I'll take you through some more exercises. Okay, so let's do that together then. So here we go then. Breathing in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, just hold at the bottom. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's the sort of rhythm. You can carry on counting if you want, but you don't need to. Try and feel that rhythm in your body. I'm just going to leave you with that for a little bit because after this workshop, you can then practice these breathing patterns. So the idea is you're breathing slower and deeper than you would normally, and smoother and feel yourself grounding in your body. So I'm going to leave you with that for about 40 seconds. Okay, so the idea then is when you're practicing vagal breathing, and there's a lot on the internet, you can go, you're practicing the slowing and this deepening. And this slowing and the deepening, particularly with the diaphragm, helps to stimulate the vagus. Now, you can do other things. You can lift your arms as you breathe in and let them fall as you breathe out. You can do some qigong, where you do various exercises. You can see them on the internet, where your breathing is in tune with body movement. You can do Tai Chi, where your breathing is in tune with body movement. But in all of them, they're all about deepening and slowing the breath. That's really quite crucial. And in mindfulness, when you're doing mindfulness, you can literally hold your mind on the experience of the breathing. And every time your mind wanders off from the experience of the breathing, just gently and friendly bring it back. Okay, the next thing we're going to do now is to focus on how we've got the body, supporting the body, is the sense of grounding. Okay, so we're just sitting there with this breathing. Just notice what's happening in your body. Feet flat on the floor. Notice if you feel yourself more stable in your chair, sitting like a mountain, feeling slightly heavier in your chair, feeling the chair holding you up, supporting you. As you're breathing in this slower, deeper way, notice how you feel more stable, more grounded, sitting like a mountain. Okay, so you can practice that then. You can practice that for as long as you like. Sometimes I practice that quite a lot, really. 5, 10, 15 minutes, just doing the breathing and the grounding. And one of the things I also do with it is, when I'm doing it, is compassion motivation. Now, there are a number of ways we can do this, but one of the ways is to firstly just notice the facial expression you've got. As you're doing your breathing, notice your facial expression. And now create a very gentle smile, like a friendly smile, like you're seeing somebody in front of you, a good friend, and you looking into their eyes and they're smiling back at you, maybe. So you're deliberately stimulating this system by what you are imagining. So remember, before we did all the different imaginations of worry and holiday and everything. So this is an imagination bringing this friend to mind, and the friendly smile. Okay, so you can go back to your neutral. Don't think about your friend anymore. Go back to being neutral. And just notice the difference in the texture of what you're feeling when you go back to neutral. Okay, so now you've got your breathing, you've got your posture, right? You're grounding, you're settling your body, you're grounding in the chair. Okay, now with your friendly facial expression and force, just focus on the desire to be helpful to your friend. You know, if you could really help your friend, that this would be good. You'd enjoy that. The really making the, really having this feeling, if I can help you, I will. Really feel that if you can, that motivation. If you needed me, I would try to be there for you. I might not be able to be, but I'd have a go. Keep your smiling face. And it could be anybody, it could be a child, maybe if you'd prefer a child or a partner or anybody, but just try and create that motivation, that sense of that motivation that you would want to help, right? If somebody was suffering. Okay, so you're stimulating this brain state by your posture, by your breathing, by your grounding, by your facial expression, by bringing friendship to mind, by bringing the motivation to be helpful. You're bringing all of these things. Remember brain states, there are all these different components. So you're bringing them together to create this compassionate brain state. Now, what might be a little bit more tricky, but see how you do. Imagine that your friend gradually fades from your imagination, and in its place, you can see yourself. You know, some people will start to struggle at this part.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Just notice if you're struggling. Don't worry about it. And for those of you working therapists, you can do all kinds of things. You can imagine yourself as a child or whatever. And you're interested when you, as a therapist, in any of the resistances, what happens, what's that, what that is about. But for the time being, we see the process of grounding in the body, getting the focus, getting the breathing, all of these things together, and then we generate the compassion towards the friend, and then we begin to work that towards self-compassion as well. And there are many other practices that you can go on. You can do this with somebody that maybe you don't like quite so much. Those are more advanced practices. Okay, so now we're going to practice compassionate voice tone and how to create a compassionate voice in your head. Right? So we can say hello to ourselves, right? So there you are, you can see yourself outside of yourself. Now, my name is Paul. So I could say in my mind, hello, Paul. Hello, Paul. Now that would be a neutral, see, that would be very neutral. But supposing I could create a friendly voice tone. Hello, Paul. Hello, Paul. on the out breath. So you're creating a basic tone of friendliness to the image in front of you, which is you. Now, again, I see some people who are struggling because they have problems with depression or self-criticism or whatever. That can be a little bit difficult. This can be a little bit difficult. So you might have to build up to it, but holding that sense. So here we are, we're practicing the posture, we're practicing the breathing, we're practicing the facial expressions, we're practicing the motivation to be helpful, we're refocusing on the self, we're using voice tones, we're practicing paying attention to the emotion of our voice. Because when you get anxious, you have an emotional tone to your thinking. When you get angry, you have an emotional tone to your thinking. Practicing compassionate tone to your thinking. So when you think about yourself or when you think about a life problem, create an emotional, compassionate tone. Validate your distress. Remember, we saw that on the secure base, the validation. This is very difficult. Okay. This is a difficult thing for me right now. I'm going through a difficult part of my life right now. What is suffering is very hard for me right now. And doing this with this validating, but also this really friendly, understanding voice tone. Because you remember, your compassionate brain states, right? You're bringing as many of these things together to affect the state of your brain, the interactions between these processes. And okay, so we're a bit short of time, so I do apologize. So we're going to do a little bit on compassionate motivation and behavior. So these things are worth practicing on a regular basis. And you can practice them sitting up, and you can practice them in bed, and you can practice them standing by a bus stop, because they're just ways of bringing your brain into this relationship with these motivational systems. The more you do that, the more you create habits, the more your brain will get into a state of creating compassion for you. And because of what is called neuroplasticity, over time, the brain will change. So rather than just going through life and then whatever emotional state gets triggered in you, practice going through life by generating brain states on a regular basis, generating how we pay attention, generating to how we breathe, generating to how we think in the body, generating attention to the facial expressions. When you're walking down the street, practice smiling at people and see how many people smile back at you. All right, all of these, so many things that we can do. Okay, so one last practice for you then. I'd like you to think about, if you were the most compassionate person you could be or wanted to be, or you wanted to think of the most compassionate person you could think about, what qualities would they have? What would they be particularly good at? What would identify them as, oh my God, that's a really compassionate person? Or actually, when I do that, I feel I'm quite compassionate. All right. So it might be patience, or it might be friendliness, or it might be assertiveness, or it might be gentleness, whatever you think, whatever qualities you think make another person or you yourself a very compassionate person. Just think about them for a minute. Oh, a few seconds actually, because they're a bit short of time, but just think about the qualities that really mean compassion to you. Now, remember, there are many ways of being compassionate. So you might choose kindness or assertiveness or forgiveness. Choose whatever you want. It's your choice. And these qualities can change from time to time, but choose one or two of them. And then make a commitment to practice them for the next week, much longer if you can, actually. Practice this 1 or 2 qualities. Okay, so if it's friendliness, then practice that. My one I always have to practice is patience. I'm particularly if I take on too many things, I can get irritated and a bit flustered and frustrated when I under time pressure. So I have to practice, you know. And if you talk to my daughter or family, they say, well, you're not very good at it, are you? You need to practice some more. Okay, but the key thing is that identifying the areas of your life and within yourself that you want to train. Maybe becoming more mindful. Whatever you decide, make a conscious decision and a commitment to train them, to develop them, to grow them. If you wanted to be a piano player, you'd practice the piano, wouldn't you, really? You wanted to be a tennis player. If you wanted to get fit, you'd go to the gym. So it's the same with the qualities of our mind, that we can practice qualities of mind. And when we do that, it will change the brain. Okay, so mindfulness, compassion, whatever, practice qualities of mind. Don't live on automatic pilot. Make a decision about how you'd like your life to go. Do it in a friendly, secure base, supportive way. Not as a must or a should or a have to, but I'd like to. And just practice. So, and all practices will help if you ground in the body, slowing the breath, focusing on the intention, and then pursuing whatever it is you want to pursue. Okay, so look, wonderful people. I'm so sorry that my time has run out with you. I'm always terrible with times. Part of the reason is because you have different workshops over different times. So always try and get too much done. But the handout should cover quite a lot of the material that we didn't cover. That should be pretty self-explanatory. You'll be able to read that stuff. And what I've tried to do is to give you an overview that working the biology of mind, which is different from the consciousness of mind, we can genuinely develop a compassionate brain. And when you do that, that will actually also help you if you are on the journey into enlightenment and developing deeper wisdoms about the nature of consciousness itself. So may you be well, and may your journeys into deeper understandings of the nature of mind go well for you. And once again, thank you very much to the ad4e for inviting me here. And hopefully we'll see you again in the not too distant future. So I'm going to hand back to Amber now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope the rest of your Monday goes really well. For those of you that would just like to unmute yourselves and give Paul a round of applause for a demonstration of appreciation. We've had lots of messages in the chat, Paul, saying thank you very much. But if anybody, would like to say anything, now's your time. But thank you so much, everybody. Take care.